Before I talk to my bookie every weekend, there's one man I talk to about all the sports odds, and that's the editorial editor from the Colorado Springs Gazette, our good friend Wayne Laugesen. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
Nice shirt. You're looking very, very Fabio there.
Very good.
Very, very good.
Fabio and I are the same.
I can tell. Yeah. All right, let's talk football, because I've got to say, having Tim Tebow here has been one of the most fun, enjoyable things I have seen in football in this town since we went to the Super Bowl. Sure. Watching the Broncos last year, particularly with that great stretch of victories, it was thrilling, it was fun, it was silly, and I loved all the people who either fell in love with Tim Tebow because he's a Christian or were just absolutely pissed off because here he is praying on the field, and that's just wrong. It was great. Now we've got the situation with Manning. But first, I want to talk about the societal implications of this. I've never seen football become a religious issue.
Yeah, it's at the center of the cultural war that we keep hearing does exist or doesn't exist. The experts will tell you both. There are books on both sides. I think this is better evidence than almost anything that we do have a culture war in the United States.
How do you mean that?
Well, a left v. right, Christian, religious
versus
v. secular, sort of traditional values versus modern progressive values, that kind of a culture war. And he's at the center of it. Not that he asked to be, I don't believe.
Is he at the center of it? I mean, he is, he's a Jesus warrior first and a football player second. And I think what really pisses people off is he's this nice guy.
Yeah.
You think of sports heroes today often are jerks. The idea of here's Mickey Mantle, and somebody you can look up to, and there's Joe DiMaggio, Mr. America. That doesn't happen anymore.
He's a really nice guy. He's a good-looking guy. He's a humble, modest person. Donated his $2.5 million signing bonus, the first money he ever really made. He was not a rich man at the time. Donated the entire thing to build a children's hospital in the Philippines. Peyton Manning has also donated money for children's hospitals. Not to take anything away from him, but his first $2.5 million, that's a pretty big statement. And he does a lot of this kind of stuff. He's got sort of the hands-on approach to needy children. And so I don't know. I think, and he's obviously quite a good football player. He looks funny throwing the ball. And he has an unusual style.
Sooner or later, a quarterback's going to need to throw the ball. It's really his job. And
that's right.
As you get older, you just can't run away from the bad guys. You actually need to throw over their heads.
And we don't want to get into a data and statistics discussion here. But if you want to know the data and the statistics, simply look up an article that we ran recently that was written by Dan Kaplis here in Denver, an attorney, radio talk show host.
And
he ran the numbers, and he said,
Dan Kaplis is in tears right now. He's in mourning. He's at the chapel. He's lighting candles.
But what Dan is upset about is the way the culture war has played out and affected the media, and this echo chamber of the media has turned on a good man. And if you want to know the numbers, Dan spent 40, 50 hours putting this together. And you can find it on Gazette.com, by the way. So if you want to see this, just go to Google, search for it, Dan Kaplis, Tebow, Manning, you'll find it. He had done one for the Post.
And Dan's a buddy of mine. He's a great guy. He is hardcore evangelical Christian. He's a Catholic, and for him, Tebow was not a football player as much as a spiritual leader, a guy who could awaken and advertise to a whole new generation in a whole new way.
Well, sure, but I know Dan as well, and I think he knows a lot about football, and he really genuinely likes football. I don't think it has so much to do with the fact that Tebow has become this de facto spiritual leader and a great role model for kids. I think it has to do with the fact that there's been this huge media attack on him because of all of those factors. And he happens to be a good football player as well, very promising football player. His 16-game, his first 16-game statistics put him up there with any of the greats, including Peyton Manning. And so Dan is disappointed by that. You've got this echo chamber. It all started back when Tebow did that pro-life, anti-abortion, whatever you want to call it, that ad
before the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That was just after he left college. I think he was a Heisman Trophy winner, and he
had won 2 national championships. Right. And so he was actually considered something. He was actually considered an acquisition that was too good for the Broncos. The criticism wasn't that he wasn't a good quarterback. It was that we shouldn't be investing in a fine quarterback right now. We need blocking and tackling. Then he did that ad, and he was suddenly not a good quarterback. That was coming from a few juvenile sports columnists at ESPN. Then it became a big echo chamber, and it became the conventional wisdom that he's a good guy, he's a nice guy, we like looking at him, but he can't throw the ball.
Here's one of the things, and again, I'm not taking a side in the spiritual debate here, but what I loved about Tebow was, one, how he'd hack people off. I mean, just by being a good kid, he'd hack people off, and that's just entertaining to me. But that the more you threw at him, none of it would stick, because he is a happy guy who's thrilled that he's being able to do this, and if the Lord wants him to do something else and he doesn't do football, he's okay with it. I think very genuinely okay with that. And that kind of attitude you never see in football. He's an anomaly.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little football here. All right, now here was a guy who got a $2 million signing bonus, and he gave it away.
Two and a half.
He gave it away to children. Children. What the hell have children ever done to you? Nothing. They've done nothing for it, but he gives it to children. And now Peyton Manning comes in with this massive contract. I mean, we're talking nearly $100 million for a career that only has a few years left, which means we're going to have to buy a lot of other good players if we're going to win, because we're going to have a few of these years to do it. Why do you think the Broncos traded Tebow? Was it because salary capped? I don't think so. Or was it because they didn't want somebody in the stand screaming Tebow every time there was an interception?
Yeah, I think it put a lot of unnatural pressure on Broncos management. And I think that John Elway is a conventional pocket quarterback. He didn't see that in Tebow. I don't really know how he could have. There was no pocket. If you look at the replays of a lot of the games from last season, the pocket vanished immediately.
Right.
So it's a good thing Tebow could move. He didn't really have any choice. When he tried to stay in the pocket, he was taken down before any of the receivers could get into place.
Which is funny, because that's exactly what Elway did. His mark and trade was, when you flushed him out of the pocket, watch out, you're in trouble.
Hey, Tebow is he is a much better first-year starting quarterback than Elway was.
Yeah.
Elway was terrible. I don't think Elway and John Fox appreciate the circus atmosphere that goes on around Tebow. I think they see it as a distraction. They think he looks funny throwing. I don't sense that either of them resent his values or his morality. But I do know that a lot of the critics do, because I'm on Facebook, you're on Facebook, we both have a lot of friends, you have a few more than I do, but I have 4,000 some friends on Facebook. So when I write something about Tebow, I get all kinds of feedback. I mean, you post a Tebow thing on Facebook and check back 3-4 hours later, you're gonna have a couple hundred contributions to your thread. When I would see something very vicious, from someone who obviously knew a lot about sports and how he couldn't play the game, go check their bio. And it was almost always someone who was, a secular leftist, and that shows up in many different ways on the bio. They will call themselves progressive or liberal, atheist. What are the other terms for that? You would see this all the time.
You saw the Saturday Night Live skit.
Oh, yeah, it was hilarious.
That was
hysterical, and I thought it was very tastefully done.
I thought it was tastefully done, too. There's nothing to be offended by. Did you ever see?
Not at all.
The late night host, Jimmy Fallon, I think, did a version of, instead of David Bowie, it was David Towie, or it was Tim Bowie, that was it.
Tim Bowie.
And doing ground control to Major Tom, but it was Tim Tebow to Jesus Christ. It was hysterical. I mean,
missed it.
It was some good. This has been a circus, but don't you want a circus for football?
A circus.
Isn't that
Look,
good business?
There were a lot of teams that wanted that circus. We were the center of the football universe as long as Tebow was here, whether we won or lost. But quite frankly, we had a pretty good season, considering that he got on the field when we were 1-4, took us to the playoffs, won a playoff game for the first time in 6 years. We had not been getting into the playoffs, much less winning playoff games, before Tim Tebow took over. It's a very discouraging message to send, because there are a lot of people, I know a lot of people whose families are into Broncos football again. For the first time, again, after a long hiatus, or for the first time ever. And their kids are into it.
I haven't been watching football in years, because it's the same thing, and I don't want to lose my Sunday. This year, I watched.
Yeah.
You seem to be down on the whole Peyton Manning acquisition. Tell me why.
I think Peyton Manning is probably, if not the greatest quarterback who's ever played the game, right up there in the top 3 or 4. He's great. And nobody could say it's a bad acquisition. It's a risky acquisition because he's 36 years old. He's severely injured. I mean, he's had 20-plus surgeries, 4 serious surgeries. His neck is fused. His vertebrae, I believe 4 or 5 vertebrae are fused. I'm not a medical expert, so don't take that one to the bank. But it's serious stuff. And, Denver's going to have to invest very heavily in its offensive line. He can't be left out there the way that Tebow was. Because I don't care, you can have the greatest arm in the world. If you don't have time to get your receivers in place, you don't have a pocket protecting you. And he certainly doesn't have the ability to move the way that Tebow did.
You can say you don't have a dog in this fight, but you're sounding like you've got a dog in this fight.
I do have a dog in the fight.
What is your dog in the fight?
My dog in the fight is I think it would have been wiser to stick with Tim Tebow and build a team around him. At least attempt it for 3 or 4 years and see how it goes, because it was looking pretty good. This is risky. If it goes really well and he wins a Super Bowl the first 1 or 2 years that he's playing for Denver, that's great, and you can't argue with that kind of success. But even if that happens, we don't have a future with this guy. We just don't. At best, it's going to be, a ringer from another town came in, won a Super Bowl for us, and then it's pretty much over because he's reaching the end of his career.
Let me push you on this one. Is it that you don't think we're building a long-term team around a star player like we did with John Elway, and we had 17 years with a hometown hero, and I just love that? Or is it because this guy is a Jesus freak, and that's really the part here? Is your opposition to this based on football, or is it based on the culture war?
I think it's based on both, but I think it's fair to say that it's heavily based on the culture war aspect of it. I like that he's a Jesus freak. Don't get me wrong, I think that's great. And I think some of the things that he does very publicly, like giving of himself to others who are much less fortunate than him, great message. I love it all. But what really hacks me off and others like Dan Caplis is that this guy is getting this bad deal, and he's not getting a fair shake precisely because of the culture war. And because that culture war has created such a circus around him. Some people don't like the distraction. Some people don't like the attention he gets.
All right, less than a minute left.
Yeah.
Do you really think that he's been a victim of the culture war? That if he was agnostic or a quiet Christian instead of a loud Christian, do you think that we would have kept this guy? I
do. I think that it would be generally viewed as insane to get rid of a guy who you put in, you're 5 games into the season, you've lost all but 1 game. Then you start winning, you get into the playoffs, and you win your first playoff game against a giant in the National Football League. I don't think that happens very often. I think I think there was every reason to believe that we were building a team around another young hometown hero that could be here for 12 to 15 years.
How long till we find out whether you're right or wrong? 2 years, I bet.
Well, I don't know, but it better start going well right away for Manning and Fox and Elway, or else the critics are going to go nuts.
Wayne, as usual, thank you. Always Gazette.com for the Colorado Springs Gazette. Hey, listen for me on KHOW Radio on Sunday evenings. Join me, listen to it give me a call. I'm a lonely guy. We'll see you next week.